Hey guys, Wyatt Claypool here, and today I'm joined with Greg Staley from Diverge Media, since we're both out here in Cambridge, Ontario, helping the New Blue Party in the provincial election. Make sure to vote for them if you live in Ontario. And as you can see, we are obviously in our very plush satellite studio, also known as a random hotel room. But the show must go on, and we want to talk about some Canadian news today, and specifically news about the news. Have you heard the Liberals want to double the funding for the CBC?
$1 billion wasn't enough.
It's actually 1.4 billion and they want to double it from there, so it's like 2.8 billion. I heard this not quite doubling, but like, my goodness, they're going to turn it into doubling if they try anyways. Why do they want to double the funding, Greg?
I don't know. Your polling is going down, so invest in government propaganda more?
No. That's the cynical reason. The real reason, which is already very cynical, is that there are a bunch of dirty, nasty Americans who live south of our border. And for some reason, we need our own propaganda to allow Canadians to think like Canadians, or we might have our minds infected by American news. But this is, I'm trying to be silly about it, but that's legitimately it. The Canadian media needs more funding to ward off American perspectives, which, if you haven't noticed, is literally the Canadian government admitting that the Canadian legacy media that they fund is propaganda.
See, we just need more hockey games. We don't need more state-funded propaganda through CBC. If we just have more hockey games, it has the same effect, and then they can run commercials just like they did. Like the whole game was wild to watch. Bonnie Crombie commercials coming on, and
we saw sometimes the same commercial in like the same commercial break. Obviously, we're talking about the Canada-US game. Legitimately, he's right. That's like a better propaganda value in just seeing Canadians win a hockey game against the Americans than all the CBC you've ever watched in your life distilled and like injected. There's nothing about the CBC that's remotely interesting. But I want to jump over to, I believe it's Jennifer O'Connell here, making the case for why Canadian media needs to be even further girded up, or this might actually be Pascal Saint-Onge. I can never keep the two straight.
The criticism of the company is that it gets $1 billion, $1.5 billion in round numbers, and doesn't necessarily deliver the audiences and the service that Canadians want. Your argument is that Canada, on a per capita basis, gets less money than most G7 countries, and you're proposing going from 33 per capita, which the CBC gets now, $33 a year, somewhere close to the average of $62 per capita. What's the amount, and do you really think there's an appetite for that kind of extra spending in this point in time?
Definitely, and I don't think that we should get distracted by the minority of voices who say that the CBC should not exist anymore. In
minority
reality,
has she seen the polling? It's like literally over half. Over half of people want their funding cut.
But also, that's wild. They're proposing $62 per capita, so $62 per Canadian to the CBC to float terrible news. That's very biased.
And by the way, it's based on just an arbitrary measure that other countries give their main state broadcast for $62 a year. I'm like, yeah, but add up all the other subsidies that the Toronto Star gets, that Post Media gets, and some of them are more conservative or more liberal, but all of them, like Cult MTL, the Canadian Anti-Hate Network, if you added it all up, we're probably already giving more than $62 a year per person.
Like there's a broken trust in media. You know what will fix that? More government dollars.
Of course.
Past number of years, close to 80% of the Canadian population supports a better CBC. And the investments that I'm proposing are, yes, aiming towards the middle ground of the other G7 countries, but it's also
the middle ground between 33 and 62, or $62 per capita, your middle ground.
No, I'm saying that there's a lot of
room there.
There's a lot of room there. What's important is that the CBC gets the public funding it needs to be able to fulfill its mandate and make sure that it's servicing Canadians both in French, English, and 8 Indigenous languages.
Yeah, I'm going to cut her off from here because I don't think we need to hear the rest of it. I find this perspective so obnoxious, and sorry for the reach, guys. This is like the most ghetto show I've ever run in my life. Thanks, Greg, for being here. But the idea that they need more money to fulfill their mandate. How do you objectively fill a media company's mandate? They're just putting out content. There's like a content. It's not like they're accountants or something like that where you know when they fulfill their job. It's like they're doing weather. They're doing like bad political chat shows.
Yeah, they're predetermining an outcome on a story and then asking for comment. Like so one of the things she said was 8 indigenous languages. Currently it's just English and French. It was like how much of this proposed funding you're asking for is going to be simply to have 8 indigenous channels of like different languages.
And let's be clear, nobody's watching it.
No.
That's always the dirty secret of the media subsidies. The people being subsidized, nobody's watching them. On like a per dollar basis of how much money they get from the government and how many people watch these people, it's like literally actually probably counterintuitive. Like the more money they get, the less people actually watch. That's why the CBC, if you remember, it was between like 22 and 2023 and people kept quoting it because it was so silly. They had 4.2 market capture as of 2022. And then I think Catherine Tate, the CEO of CBC, then says, well, this year we're aiming for 3.4. It's like, what the heck? You're going to have 0.8 less market capture this year, and that's your new red line, even though you have more money. You have more money. They have a streaming service. They have literally the money to pay for any person that they want to be an anchor, and they can't get anyone to watch. And it's because the propaganda comes before the quality. That's the problem with it. It doesn't matter if you dump $2.8 billion into it to fight the Americans. It doesn't have the effect that they want. It's a way of keeping propagandists employed who every once in a while will spill out a story against your political opponents.
All the CBC's been since Trudeau's been elected is a way for them to carry water for the Liberal government. It's clear to Canadians that's what it is. And so, yeah, like, why can't you build on your numbers despite how much you get? I don't need to go watch somebody. Like, it's very clear that they're a one-sided news outlet, air quote, and it's one way. It doesn't go conservative politics route. It's very liberal. And so you know what you're going to get. If you just take the story, take the generic properties of the story, and you already know what the CBC is going to say about it.
I don't think people also quite grasp how little work the typical CBC journalist does. Most of the time, it's some random person in a small town who just looks up their council's website and copy and pastes press releases. Oh, the city council has announced a new blah, blah, blah. And then they just say who voted for what and what the proposal was, and that's it. And this person's making probably close to like 6 figures a year, or like $50,000 at least,
they're making,
to print out 1 or 2 stories a week.
Yeah, making a respectable, like, real people money.
And when you actually know how little views get for the type of things that they're reporting, and the fact that most people probably could have gotten this information from a local's Facebook post about it, who was probably out before the CBC, you realize these people are probably speaking to less than 500 people every time they put out an article.
If you're below the age of like 60, you're probably not watching the CBC. I don't know what their core demographics are, but I hazard the guess it's like 60 to like
News is definitely older in general. Most people who watch political news tend to be older. At the same time, the thing with the CBC is it's mostly metropolitan as well. Is that you watch the CBC because I don't watch Fox, kind of a mentality. Oh, I watch the CBC because I'm not going to watch, all those racists in the independent press. And speaking of all those racists in the independent press like us, by the way, guys, subscribe to this very racist channel. I'm very much kidding, but subscribe. I wanted to bring up this post because it's hilarious. So there's this Nathaniel Dove guy who works for Global News, or I think, Global News. And he says, and this is from a press conference yesterday, he says, ahead of Poilievre's press conference, his comms team announced he'd be only taking 5 questions from pre-selected media. True North, Y Media, South Asian Daily, Radio Canada, which is, the CBC, so they got one in, Rebel News, and Oxygen Canada News. When asked why, his team just said, that's what we're doing today. You can feel the contempt for Poilievre calling on independent press here.
Yeah, like, heavens forbid we turn the tables just one time. Because I remember, like, it was during COVID, and I snuck in with my liberal camouflage. Trudeau was coming through to speak on the campaign tour. And I got in because you had to get pre-approved as media. So I wore a pink dress shirt, and I call it my liberal camouflage because they didn't ask many questions after I showed up like that. And yeah, they basically told me outright, well, we'll see what happens. If we get, you might get a question in, but probably not going to happen. They already had their pre-selected mainstream media outlets like your CBC, CTV, and it wasn't going to go to an independent guy like me that they'd never heard of.
And Nathaniel Dove, he's not going to consider it pre-selected if he gets selected.
Yeah.
The whole point is not pre-selected if it's global, if it's the CBC, CTV, like a city news. If they get picked, then it's not pre-selected. But now it's very concerning.
They got ordained.
Yeah, they picked Juno News, which is what True North is now named. They picked like the Rebel News. I can't believe it. Rebel News, an organization that actually has its own audience who watches their stuff because they actually like it and not because they're trying to show how like properly Canadian they are because they watch the CBC. And that's the thing, that the media just oozes entitlement and contempt at this point. And then they wonder why people don't trust them anymore. And the trust numbers in Canadian press has gone down every single year.
You go back to this idea, like you're taking billions of dollars in subsidies. It already plants a mistrust because are you going to speak out against the government if you have a billion reasons why not to?
Mm-hmm.
And that could be removed at any moment. And hundreds or thousands of people lose their jobs as a result of genuine criticism.
Well, I did a story on Cult MTL, that hacky Montreal-based magazine. They also get money from the Quebec government, but they get like $40,000, $24,000 a year from the federal government. It's only like a couple guys running it. That's a lot of money to just a couple random guys who also have other sources of income from a paper. And since they start getting that money, you can literally see that they just start putting out a slam piece against Poilievre every other day. And it's always something absurd like, oh, a new poll comes out that shows 2/3 of Canadians don't like Poilievre. And it's like, no, you did a preferred prime minister poll and 35% of people approved of him. And then the next closest person is only at 17.
Yeah, it's a little money can do a lot of damage. And so like the idea of dumping more money into state-funded propaganda, you have no trust as is. And the reason you have no trust is not because you're not getting enough funding. It's clear as day. You have an agenda, and it's not a conservative agenda by any stretch of the imagination. So why would, if it's broken and you're just throwing money into the grinder, it's not going to fix it.
No, the thing that's also insulting too is it boxes out independent media or anyone doing a good job. Because the thing is, when you employ hundreds and hundreds of reporters the way that the CBC does, the thing is that they can always get to a story before you. Are they going to do a good job? No. But the thing is that because they also publish it from multiple sources, they'll publish it from CBC Calgary, CBC Edmonton, CBC Alberta, CBC News directly. And so you will get buried in the SEO. If you did a good job researching a story and you put it out, you sent all the media requests out, you didn't set people up, you weren't trying to smear anyone, you will never be read, because the thing is they will have gotten to it first. And most people will just click on what happens, like what's at the top of Google. They're not going to scroll down and find out who has like more scholarship behind what they did.
Well, that's the thing. Like you can't compete with that as an independent. All you can do is better quality work. But when it's been picked over 10, 15, 20, 100 times, by the time you get to it, people are past that story. We live in a short attention span, society. I've seen that title 10 times. I'm not clicking at that point. Like I don't need, unless, you have a really trusted audience, you'll get some people that will stop and click and read your stuff. But at the end of the day, if I've seen the title 50 times and I've already read an article, I'm not stopping to be like, well, who is this independent I may have never heard of? And what do they have to say about the thing I've already heard about 50 times?
Yeah, and so that's a big problem in the Canadian media space that's underrated. It's just how bloated the whole thing gets, which means pretty much nobody's successful, but you don't have to be successful as a CBC journalist because your salary's paid whether or not, 5 people are reading you or 500,000, and it's probably 5. But that should be it for us today, guys. We'll probably be back with more videos as we're here in Cambridge. I'm here until like the 25th. You're here in a little bit less than that. Yeah. It's been fun so far hitting doors and having your feet feel like they're freezing off. I underestimated how bad the winter is in the Kitchener, Cambridge area, because I come from Calgary where the winter's much more intense.
I know, real cold.
Yeah, I know what the real cold is. You're up in northern Saskatoon, or sort of that mid-northern Saskatoon area. So it's like, is that? Yeah,
No, I'm
that's
southern Saskatchewan, like Regina area.
fair
down
enough.
south.
But still, like it's like you had like a negative 40 day before you showed up here. But you probably take that over like the moist cold with like literally 8 feet of snow on either side of the road in Kitchener. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, the snow's a bit much.
Yeah, okay. We're going to try and go and survive, guys. Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. See you later.